Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. A new book out tomorrow by legendary journalist Bob Woodward describes Donald Trump as a threat to national security. The book is clearly getting under the president's skin, inspiring multiple tweets and a parade of advisors on the Sunday shows to respond. It's just the latest sign of an insurgency that, when coupled with the anonymous op-ed published by the New York Times, depicts a president who is out of control and unstable, a description with added credibility because it comes from within the president's ranks. And just 2 months from the midterms, it's a growing political problem for the president, as it's helping to plunge his approval ratings to new lows. A brand new Quinnipiac poll released this afternoon has the president's approval rating at just 38%, with just 32% of respondents thinking he's honest. It's a grim political reality that only gets grimmer as Bob Woodward continues to speak out. He issued a new warning about the president just this morning.
Here's the problem. This has not been treated seriously enough, and some of the things Trump did and does jeopardize the real national security. I've never seen an instance when the president is so detached from the reality of what's going on.
And here's the president's attack on the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist he once praised. Quote, "The Woodward book is a joke, just another assault against me in a barrage of assaults, using now disproven, unnamed, and anonymous sources. Many have already come forward to say that quotes by them, like the book, are fiction. Dems can't stand losing. I'll write the real book." But as with the anonymous op-ed, the book is packing a punch and driving down support for the president because Woodward relies on dozens of interviews with the people closest to the president, the resistance within. Here's Woodward explaining those denials to the accounts in fear by some of the president's advisors.
They are not telling the truth.
That's why.
No, but look, what's going on here, and my old boss at the Washington Post, Ben Bradley, the great editor, used to say the truth emerges. Sometimes it takes time. These people, these are political statements to protect their jobs, totally understandable. But this is as carefully done as you can do an excavation of the reality of what goes on.
Here to help us sift through the day's developments, some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us from the Washington Post, White House Bureau Chief Phil Rucker, Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, is here. Jonathan Lemire, AP White House reporter. Heidi Przybyla joins us, NBC News national political reporter. And Jason Johnson, politics editor for The Root. Phil Rucker, let me start with you. Bob Woodward, I know you read the book. You were one of the first to read it and report on some of its most blockbuster findings. I've read through a lot of it now, and what he says is an understatement. The truth emerges. It feels like the floodgates have opened and the truth is now pouring out.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's what's so unsettling inside the White House. It's one of the reasons why you saw Vice President Pence on the TV shows on Sunday. He doesn't usually do those sorts of interviews to try to project some sign of stability, to show to the world that they've got things under control. But if you look at the president's Twitter feed, it doesn't seem to be under control. He's clearly rattled and agitated by Bob Woodward's reporting in the book. He wants people to believe it's a fiction, but then the White House also wants people to believe that this is just griping from disgruntled former staffers, so it can't be both. And the White House is having a difficult time rebutting some of the facts here. One of the reporters in the briefing with Sarah Sanders today asked, what are the specific facts that you're contesting in the Woodward book? And they've not provided any sort of accounting of what they're challenging in Woodward's book, only saying that the entire book itself is fiction. And that's what's troubling or difficult to sort of grapple with the explanation for how they're dealing with this.
And Jonathan Lemire, they don't think it's a disgruntled former staffer because there's an effort to try to root out the leaker.
Right. There is. The White House right now is trying, whether it's Sarah Sanders and John Kelly and others are looking for, at the president's request, you're trying to figure out who the source of the leakers of the book, as well as the author of that anonymous New York Times op-ed. But it's a question of exactly how. We've seen the president over the last couple of days call for Jeff Sessions, the embattled attorney general, to mobilize the Department of Justice to try to figure out who did this, which of course is setting off alarm bells throughout Washington. There's no sense that a crime was committed here in the book or in the op-ed. These aren't state secrets. It's not classified information that's been released. So therefore...
So what would the rationale be for using the FBI, the top law enforcement agency, to find them?
The rationale supplied by some, including Rudy Giuliani, who has told me and told the president this, is that the idea is if this person is willing to, the op-ed author, let's say, to go to the steps of giving this information to the New York Times, they would do the same, perhaps, of classified information, which feels like the Minority Report, right?
Exactly,
It's like a pre-crime.
the thought police, right?
The pre-crime.
We got a few pre-crimes for the president in the category of collusion and obstruction. Frank Figliuzzi, I don't like to talk about red lines because they're all pastel pink these days, but it seems like this will be another test of the guardrails. If the FBI is asked to investigate a pre-crime that was never committed by anyone, it seems like that would be another test of the guardrails. Do you agree?
I do. Here's what I think will happen if this plays out this way. I think if this gets to Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, he's going to politely decline to look into this because he's going to ask two questions. Has a crime been committed? And the answer seems to be no. And then secondly, if not, is there a national security interest at stake here? And right now, what we have is a disgruntled personnel, right? We've got somebody that I understand from an HR perspective they're looking for, they want to find. I get that. But what concerns me the most is if this is going to be used by the White House, the declination by DOJ or the FBI to look into this as fodder to fire either the Attorney General or Chris Wray, then we're going to get into quite a bit of a crisis within the Justice Department.
And let's jump right into Christopher Wray, because NBC News reported that Christopher Wray is one of the latest targets of the president's ire. He doesn't get as much attention on the president's Twitter feed as beleaguered Jeff Sessions. It's hard to say Jeff Sessions' name without putting beleaguered in front of it, or embattled Rod Rosenstein or crooked Mueller or whatever it is that the president says about him. But we reported last week that Christopher Wray is increasingly the target of the president's ire. Do you think that this would be the kind of flashpoint that would rally the rank and file of the FBI behind Christopher Wray? Frank?
I think the rank and file is already behind Christopher Wray. I think what really is going to get to a flashpoint for Director Wray is the release of classified information by the president if he releases the Broussard or the Carter Page classified documents, and sources and methods and techniques are involved at a secret or top secret level. I think you'll see Chris Wray challenge the president and do so publicly.
Let me bring us back to the point, Heidi, that Phil Rucker raised about the vice president. What I thought was striking, we'll listen to this sound, was he was willing to take a lie detector test to prove that he wasn't the author of the anonymous op-ed. But no one is asking anyone to take a lie detector test and attest that the president is indeed stable and fit for office. And that seems to be the debate that the country's having. Let's watch Pence.
Do you think you know who Anonymous is?
I don't. I don't know. But I do know that they should resign and leave this administration.
Should all top officials take a lie detector test, and would you agree to take one?
I would agree to take it in a heartbeat and would submit to any review the administration wanted to do.
The administration should do that?
Well, look, that'd be a decision for the president.
As recently as late this morning, Omarosa, a former White House staffer, was talking about how they all texted amongst themselves about the 25th Amendment. Why isn't there a call for all of them to strap them up to a polygraph and answer whether or not the president's fit and whether or not they actually discuss the 25th Amendment, as Anonymous suggests?
Well, this is an overreaction on behalf of Pence. He's trying to get ahead of it to prove his loyalty to the president. But why is that happening, Nicolle? It's happening because of distant history and in terms of more recent history. You and I sat on this set several months ago when we called that it was going to be the end of Rex Tillerson after the moron story, and after he refused to deny that he made those comments. Everybody saw that. These are all the same officials. They all learned from that. Jeff Bennett, our great White House reporter, said earlier today that back in the 1970s, Ron Ziegler, Nixon's press secretary, used to regularly lie to the press, and later called the press, said they were doing shabby journalism, and later had to apologize when everything came out. So Bob Woodward, let's listen to what he's saying. He's saying directly that a lot of these people, based on his own experience going back to Watergate, are feeling like this is something they're compelled to do. They've got to make these denials.
And just on this idea that Woodward said, I thought that was really profound. He said, the truth emerges. Donald Trump is running from his own ugly truth.
And everyone is more and more comfortable in sharing those truths now, right? We had Fire and Fury, then we had Unhinged, now we have Fear. And also remember, Omarosa said, oh, I'm not the only person who had tapes. Everybody apparently walked into the White House with a GoPro and a tape recorder, right, and was recording all this stuff. And so clearly people are more and more comfortable because they recognize that the public will believe them now. And that's, I think, what this White House is worried about. Not just that you have a certain number of leakers, a certain number of people who are concerned, but that the public believes it. The public's like, yeah, I really don't think this guy is running this place anymore. I really don't think he's in control. And once that message really, really trickles down to the public, this administration has a lot less power than they ever imagined.
Phil, I want you and Jonathan to weigh in on this. Is there any self-awareness that this obsession with finding the leaker, all this discussion from the Vice President of the United States of America about a polygraph, ignores that even the president's own supporters may be very unnerved? I mean, you look at 38% approval rating. That includes people that voted for Donald Trump. 32% think the president tells the truth. That means a big swath of his own voters now believe that he's a liar. Is there any effort to reassure people that the commander-in-chief is mentally stable?
Not a particularly broad effort, Nicolle. Certainly Vice President Pence tried to talk about that over the weekend. But in all of those denials, many from cabinet members over, late last week, many of them were just denying that it was them who wrote it. They didn't deny, like, the substance of the editorial. And in just conversations with various sources in the administration, people say things like, oh, it couldn't be this person. That person wouldn't have the courage to do this op-ed, but it's not like that person didn't believe what was written in the New York Times editorial. So there's sort of an assumption that a lot of what's there is a belief shared by many in the administration, but it's just a matter of figuring out who actually had the courage to put that in writing for the New York Times.
And this is in line with your reporting. I want to read you something that was in Axios. Trump's advisors have spent the last few days reading a PDF of the Woodward book, and the president now knows that some of his previously trusted White House aides play starring roles in Woodward's narrative. Trump is privately furious at Gary Cohn and Rob Porter, and sources with direct knowledge of Trump's thinking tell me it's possible he publicly attacks Porter and Cohen this week. So again, this obsession with revenge, this obsession with selling scores, instead of assuring, forget about all of us. You never had me. You lost me at rapists and murderers. But not assuring your own supporters that you're not cuckoo doesn't seem to be on their to-do list.
Right. This is a president who's obsessed with loyalty, even though we know loyalty for him is often a one-way street. And he is angry. He feels like the walls are closing in, and has said, he sort of had a very telling comment the other day on Air Force One where he suggested, he was talking about how he sometimes looks around in the meetings to see who's in there, because I think there's a sense that he is less sure of who he can believe, who he can trust, even in his own administration. To piggyback on Phil's point, which is exactly right, there are very few people who are denying being the author of this op-ed. They're not denying the substance of it. And in fact, people that I've talked to inside and outside the administration are sort of playing the same guessing games, believing, well, I didn't do it, but I know 5 people who could have done it. And there is...
I've heard that. I didn't have the you-know-whats to write it, but I think the same
these people could have done it. And there's no effort to suggest that this is not a widely held belief. Not at all. And there are some people, I know that some people who speak to the president frequently over the weekend tried to get him off this, to suggest that, like, this is not a good issue for you. Let's move on. Let's talk about something. Focus on the midterms. Focus on something you can sell, like the economy. We saw a little bit of that today at the White House briefing, although that was mostly in response to Obama's claims and the president taking the credit for the economy. But Trump can't get by it. He is fixated on this and isn't going to let it go.
The through line, Frank, through this book is that Donald Trump is a liar. It opens with some fantastic reporting about the campaign where Steve Bannon, who meets him 6 years before he runs, confronts him with 2 whoppers. He says, you've never voted in a Republican primary. That's going to hurt. And Trump says, yes, I have. And then he says, and you're pro-choice. And he says, no, I'm not. And Bannon walks out and says, this guy's a pathological liar. And then the book ends with the line of the president's lawyer in the Russia probe, John Dowd, saying the president's a bleeping liar, a bleeping liar. So this idea of lies runs through the whole thing. And we are often talking about the Mueller probe and all the witnesses, all the White House advisors who've been before Robert Mueller. This book and this op-ed seem to seal the deal on Donald Trump as really a pathological liar.
This is an administration that really has been characterized by lies, and the problem with this is that the president now is boxed in by his lies, his years of lying, and this goes directly to the heart of why he just cannot be interviewed by Bob Mueller. He certainly, even written responses to questions, Nicolle, are going to be problematic because of the counter statements and the statements against self-interest that he's made over the course of his administration and his campaign. And eventually that's going to trip him up.
Let me put up for you, Heidi, the list of people. We were talking about this insurgency within. Before there was an insurgency of people speaking the truth, there was a list of White House advisors who had testified before Robert Mueller. Here they are. Hope Hicks, one of his most trusted and loyal confidants, who may or may not have some legal exposure herself for her interviews or the conversations she had with the president about his interviews. Mike Pompeo has been in. Don McGahn, we just learned, spent at least 30 hours with the special counsel. Don McGahn was probably around for everything that's under scrutiny in the obstruction of justice probe. Reince Priebus, the one-time chief of staff, was around when Flynn was there and around the questions about his firing. He was around for the Comey firing. Sean Spicer was involved in all those flashpoints. Dan Coates, the DNI, who knew nothing about Helsinki. Mike Rogers, his former NSA director. Steve Bannon, his former strategist. Stephen Miller, I don't know what he does, all those scary, cruel things. And Jeff Sessions, his sitting AG. So, I mean, you talk about a paranoid president. I suppose there's reason to be paranoid.
Well, to your point, this has been potentially one of the presidents who values loyalty the most, but has had the most disloyalty within his ranks, because it is a one-way street. And I think the confluence of the op-ed and the book this week may signal a shift to kind of a save yourself mentality among the Republicans, because can you imagine if this happened during the Obama administration, how Nancy Pelosi would have reacted or how Harry Reid would have reacted? We saw none of that on the Hill. And it wasn't just the White House officials who weren't defending it. It was all the Republicans on the Hill. The ones we did hear from were Bob Corker and Ben Sasse, who said, hey, what's new here? This is what we've all known from the very beginning.
Phil Rucker, since you're leaving us, I want to go there on Bob Woodward, because Donald Trump has praised Bob Woodward when he's been fair and open to Donald Trump's arguments or claims. And he attacked the Obama White House when Woodward was tough on them. Talk about Bob Woodward as a journalist and sort of his standing in American culture as one of the preeminent truth tellers in our politics.
That's the right phrase, Nicolle. Preeminent truth teller. That's what he is. He, along with Carl Bernstein, broke open the Watergate scandal in the 70s that befell President Nixon. And ever since then, Woodward has covered administrations. He's covered presidencies. He's found truth where White Houses have tried to hide it. And he's written these sorts of books about so many previous presidents. And it's almost like Trump has met his perfect match in Woodward now after this long career. And the method that Woodward had, which he explained on the Today Show, is methodical. He did, hundreds of hours of these deep background interviews with sources. He collects papers. He tries to piece together facts and find narratives and truth. And that's the portrait of the book there. And it's not only that Trump has complimented Woodward when he wrote the Obama books, he also complimented Woodward in that phone call just a couple of weeks ago.
That's right. The book is excellent. I'm a little more than halfway through it, and it's just scene upon scene with multiple accounts from multiple advisors to this president. Phil Rucker, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you.
After the break,